Perhaps the United States and Israel are justified in cowering in terror before Iran because of its extraordinary military power. And it's possible to evaluate that concern. For example, you can turn to the authoritative analysis, detailed analysis of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the main source for such information, last April, which conducted and published a long study of the regional military balance. And they find, I'll quote, a conclusive case that the Arab Gulf states have an overwhelming advantage over Iran in both military spending and access to modern arms. That's the Gulf Cooperation Council states, that's Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. They outspend Iran on arms by a factor of 8. It's an imbalance that goes back decades. And their report observes further that the Arab Gulf states have acquired and are acquiring some of the most advanced and effective weapons in the world, while Iran has been essentially forced to live in the past, often relying on systems originally delivered at the time of the Shah, 40 years ago, which are essentially obsolete. And the imbalance is, of course, even greater with Israel, which, along with the most advanced U.S. weaponry and its role as a virtual offshore military base of the global superpower, has a huge stock of nuclear weapons. There are, of course, other threats that justify serious concern and can't be brushed aside. A nuclear weapon state might leak nuclear weapons to jihadis. No joke. In the case of Iran, the threat is minuscule. Not only are the Sunni jihadis the mortal elements of Iran, but the ruling clerics, whatever one thinks of them, have shown no signs of clinical insanity, and they know that if there was even a hint that they were the source of a leaked weapon, they and all they possess would be instantly vaporized. That doesn't mean that we can ignore the threat, however, not from Iran, where it doesn't exist, but from U.S. ally Pakistan, where the threat is in fact very real. It's discussed recently by two leading Pakistani nuclear scientists, Pervez Hudboy, Zia Mian, Britain's leading journal of international affairs. They write that increasing fears of militants seizing nuclear weapons or materials and unleashing nuclear terrorism have led to the creation of a dedicated force of over 20,000 troops to guard nuclear facilities. There is no reason to assume, however, that this force would be immune to the problems associated with the units guarding regular military facilities, which have frequently suffered attacks with insider help. In other words, the whole system is laced with jihadi elements, in large measure because of what Patrick Coburn described, the Wahhabization of Sunni Islam from Saudi Arabia and with the strong support of the United States ever since the Reagan administration. Well, in short, the problem is real enough, very real, in fact. It's not being seriously addressed. It's not even discussed. Rather, what we're concerned about is fantasies concocted for other reasons about the current official enemy. Opponents of the Iran nuclear deal maintain that Iran is intent on developing nuclear weapons. U.S. intelligence can discern no evidence for this, but there is no doubt at all that in the past they have, in fact, intended to do so. We know this because it was clearly stated by the highest authorities in Iran. The highest authority of the Iranian state informed foreign journalists that Iran would develop nuclear weapons, certainly and sooner than one thinks. The father of Iran's nuclear energy program, former head of Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, expressed his confidence that the leadership's plan is to build a nuclear bomb. And a CIA report also had, in their words, no doubt that Iran would develop nuclear weapons if neighboring countries do, as of course they have. All of this was under the Shah, the highest authority just quoted. That is, during the period when high U.S. officials, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Kissinger, were urging the Shah to proceed with nuclear programs, and they were also pressuring universities to accommodate these efforts. My own university was an example, MIT. Under government pressure, it made a deal with the Shah to admit Iranian students to the nuclear engineering department in return for grants from the Shah. This was done over the very strong objections of the student body, but with comparably strong faculty support. That's a distinction that raises a number of interesting questions about academic institutions and how they function. The faculty are the students of a couple of years ago, but have a different institutional place. Opponents of the nuclear, in fact, some of these MIT students are now running the Iranian nuclear programs. Opponents of the nuclear deal argue that it didn't go far enough. You've heard a lot of that. And interestingly, some of the supporters of the deal agree, demanding that it go beyond what has been achieved and that the whole Middle East should rid itself of nuclear weapons, and in fact, weapons of mass destruction generally. Actually, I'm quoting Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Javad Zarif. He's reiterating the call of the non-aligned movement, most of the world, and the Arab states for many years to establish a weapons of mass destruction-free zone in the Middle East. That would be a very straightforward way to address whatever threat Iran is alleged to pose. But a lot more than that is at stake. This is discussed recently in the leading U.S. World Arms Control Journal, Arms Control Today, by two leading figures in the international anti-nuclear movement, two scientists who are veterans of Pugwash and UN agencies. They observe that the successful adoption in 1995 of the resolution on the establishment of a zone free of weapons of mass destructions in the Middle East was the main element of a package that permitted the extension of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's the most important arms control treaty there is, and its continuation is conditioned on acceptance of moves towards establishing a weapons of mass destruction free zone, a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East. Repeatedly, implementation of this plan has been blocked by the United States at the annual 5-year review meetings of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, most recently by Obama in 2010 and again in 2015, a couple of months ago. The same two anti-nuclear specialists comment that in 2015, this effort was again blocked by the United States on behalf of a state that is not party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and is widely believed to be the only one in the region possessing nuclear weapons. That's a polite and understated reference to Israel. Washington's sabotage of the possibility in defense of Israeli nuclear weapons may well undermine the Non-Proliferation Treaty, as well as maintaining dangerous instability in the Middle East, always, of course, in the name of stability. This is, incidentally, not the only case when opportunities to end the alleged Iranian threat have been undermined by Washington. Some quite interesting cases, no time, and I won't go into them. But all of this raises quite interesting questions which we should be asking about what actually is at stake. So, turning to that, what actually is the threat posed by Iran? Plainly, it's not a military threat. It's obvious. We can put aside the fevered pronouncements about Iranian aggression, support for terror, seeking hegemony over the region by force, or the still more outlandish notion that even if Iran had a bomb, it might use it, therefore suffering instant obliteration. The real threat has been clearly explained by U.S. intelligence in its reports to Congress on the global security situation. Of course, they deal with Iran. And they point out, I'm quoting U.S. intelligence, Iran's nuclear program and its willingness to keep open the possibility of developing nuclear weapons is a central part of its deterrent strategy, right? It's part of Iran's deterrent strategy. No offensive policies, but they are trying to construct a deterrent. And that Iran has a serious interest in a deterrent strategy is not in doubt among serious analysts. It's recognized, for example, by U.S. intelligence. So the influential analyst, CIA veteran Bruce Riedel, who's by no means a dove, he writes that if I was an Iranian national security planner, I would want nuclear weapons as a deterrent. And the reasons are pretty obvious. He also makes another crucial comment. He points out that Israel's strategic room for maneuver in the region would be constrained by an Iranian nuclear deterrent. And that's, of course, also true of the United States. Room for maneuver means resort to aggression and violence. And yes, it would be constrained by an Iranian deterrent. For the two rogue states that rampage freely in the region, the United States and Israel, any deterrent is, of course, unacceptable. And for those who are accustomed and take for granted their right to rule by force, that concern is easily escalated to what's called an existential threat. The threat of deterrence is very severe if you expect to resort to force unilaterally at will to achieve your goals, as the U.S. and secondarily Israel do commonly. And more recently, the second U.S. ally, Saudi Arabia, has been trying to get into the club pretty incompetently with its invasion of Bahrain to prevent mild reformist measures, and more recently its extensive bombing of Yemen, which is causing a huge humanitarian crisis. So for them, a deterrent is a problem, maybe even an existential threat. That, I think, is the heart of the matter, even if it wouldn't do to say or to think. And except for those who hope to fend off possible disaster and to move towards a more peaceful and just world, it's necessary to keep to these injunctions. These are things it wouldn't do to say, wouldn't do to think. You don't read about them, you don't hear about them, but they are, I think, the heart of the issue.